Life is a series of unscripted experiences that forge us into unique individuals. These are the experiences and stories of those who possess the will, beliefs, and fortitude required to overcome obstacles, pursue their passions, and achieve success. Welcome to the HawkCast with your host, AJ Hawk.
We're going to jump right into it. I have a true professional here tonight on the podcast, so it's, it's like I'm nervous almost. I'm talking to the great Jon Anik tonight. But first off, before we get any pleasantries out of the way, Jon, just for the people that have been living under a rock and don't follow mainstream media or MMA, can you explain your recent tattoo that you got of the number 209?
Yeah, so, it's like the fourth or fifth tattoo bet I've done in my life. Thankfully, I didn't do one like betting against the Packers in a Super Bowl or something because we know how that would have gone. But no, so, I've thrown these out. I have an identical twin brother. We've had fun with this over the years. We're from Boston. So, at one point I might have had Bill Belichick's signature on my forearm, but for whatever reason, that result didn't happen. So long story short, I host a podcast as well, and we do predictions. We no longer do predictions, but this was sort of the swan song for the predictions on the podcast. But, I was picking Conor McGregor to beat Nate Diaz, largely because Nate was taking the fight on 10 days' notice, and I didn't give him much chance in the fight. So I called my co-host Kenny Florian before the podcast. I said, I want to make it fun and do another tattoo bet, and I will get the 209 tattooed on the inside of my forearm, and there it is. If Nate Diaz beats Conor McGregor on 10 days' notice with no training camp. And sure enough, he went out and did it, and you can be sure I got the tattoo. I have always been a Nick Diaz fan and a fan of the Diaz brothers for quite some time, so I thought it out. I thought there was probably a 30% chance I was getting the tattoo, and I kind of wanted it. It's my first tattoo, and we're designing number 2 pretty soon, so I'm excited about it.
So now are you going full sleeve or what?
I don't know. We'll see. I got to hit the gym a little bit before we think about sleeves. But, I was surprised at how much I enjoyed the overall experience. It was pretty exhilarating. It didn't hurt too bad, and my daughters love it. So, wow. We enjoyed it,
Well, I know that you gained a lot of respect, obviously, by following through with the bet. And a guy like Nate Diaz is not the kind of guy you want on your bad side. Yeah. So I think when you went through with it, I'm sure, has he reached out to you personally after that?
Well, he reposted what I posted on Instagram and showed his respect that way. But it was funny because, obviously there were times where maybe the UFC wasn't too happy with what was going on, and Nate wasn't too happy that he felt disrespected. And ultimately, it was partially to sort of respect these guys and to say, I'm willing to do this to immortalize myself with these guys if he can, spring this huge upset. And I thought it was a big upset, obviously, as a lot of other people did. But, once he got upset with it and it drew his attention and drew his ire to any extent, I was getting the tattoo win or lose, as a measure of respect. So when it got to that point that he felt, discredited to whatever extent, I was really hoping he would win because it obviously makes for a better story if you're getting the tattoo anyway. So all's well that ends well, and we got the 209.
Now, why was he so disrespected? Don't you have to? Don't you usually pick a winner for most fights?
I think maybe he just saw a headline. A lot of websites picked it up. I think BloodyElbow.com was the first one to actually write a story about it. If you hear what I say, I think it's pretty innocuous. But yeah, Nate certainly didn't, and a lot of other people certainly didn't. So, the last thing I can afford, obviously, as a play-by-play commentator is to have any of these fighters feel like I'm discrediting them at all. And that's something that I take very seriously, and I took very seriously after the fact. So, Nate's a pretty chill guy. I mean, let's be honest. I don't think he was super upset about the whole thing. I think he just used it as an opportunity to build momentum and help the pay-per-view and tell off a commentator who maybe went a little bit too far with a prediction.
Well, it's good. Now you have it forever, so that's a good. I don't know if there'd be any football play-by-play guys that would follow through with that one. So.
Well, and I think it's sort of you got to toe that line, right? I want to be interesting. I have opinions. I'm an MMA fan at first, right? But ultimately, I think for a play-by-play guy to be picking fight, it's not like I'm calling these fights, right? So I'm picking pay-per-view fights. I'm picking big Fox fights just against my co-host Kenny Florian, just trying to have fun on the podcast. But, I think a lot of people took issue with the fact that a play-by-play guy in any sport would be picking a sport that he calls. I don't necessarily see the conflict, but I respect that opinion so much so that I'm not going to pick any more UFC fights, at least as long as I'm under contract,
And so who are you under contract with exactly? I don't really understand. I know I hear you from what I see, you work for the UFC. Fox has a huge deal with the UFC. So are you officially a member of Zuffa and UFC or Fox?
Yeah, I am a full-time Zuffa employee, so I am not paid by Fox. I did do a college football game for FS1 this year, and I was paid by Fox for that. Other than that, I haven't seen a dime from Fox. I'm a full-time UFC employee. So
what do you do when there are not fights going on?
Well, I mean, I do play-by-play for probably 25 events a year on FS1, and then I work the desk for pay-per-views a lot of the time. You know, during football season when Jay Glazer is less available hosting the desk, I'll step in for him. I filled in for Kurt Menefee at times. So it's pretty busy. You know, there's a lot of voiceover work that goes into it leading up to events. So rarely do I have more than one weekend off at home. I'm probably away about 100, 115 nights a year. So it's pretty busy.
And your analyst, actually, Brian Stan, was on this podcast maybe a year ago, I think.
Really?
Yeah, he came on here. You talk about a true professional. I know you have a, what do you call him? What's his nickname you gave him?
I call him the greatest living American.
I love it. He's going to run for president, isn't he?
Well, you know, it's funny because I've sort of pushed him in that direction a little bit because I really think he could make a difference. You know, he, as some of your listeners might know from his appearance here, CEO of Hire Heroes USA, you know, job hunting and doing everything for retired veterans. But, man, he's just such an impressive individual. You know, a lot of people say when he goes into Marine mode, you just look out and stand back. And that's sort of the way he approaches preparing for these fights. The dude's insane. And I do think eventually he would step into politics, but it's not a fray that I think is nearly as enjoyable as calling UFC fights. So at least right now, the greatest living American is by my side. And actually, you know, I'm a Boston guy. I think Tom Brady – John Anderson on SportsCenter used to call Tom Brady the greatest living American. So I started calling fights with Stan. My twin brother calls me. He's like, dude, they're calling Brady the greatest living American, but I think Stan's probably the greatest living American. I was like, you know what? You're probably right, dude. So here we are.
Hey, you like them both. Being a Boston dude, I assume Tom Brady is high up on your list as well.
Yeah, no, he's a pretty good American, but, you know, he didn't serve our country, AJ.
You can't call him the greatest living American. That's true. Stan can have that, man. And if he does want to get into politics, he's the kind of guy that could do it. But, man, he's too good of a guy to get into politics, I feel like.
Yeah, and, you know, he would never say that. But, again, here's a guy who has 3 daughters, right? And he wants to go fight ISIS right now. You know what I mean? Like, he always feels this greater obligation. And, you know, we've had serious conversations about the fact that, you know, we're in the entertainment business, but we're not changing lives. I mean, we're creating entertainment for people, calling UFC fights. But a guy like Brian Stan, there's a greater calling, you know. I don't know if it's president, being, you know, the CEO of a company that really makes a difference. I don't know, but I think he has a greater calling, you know.
Okay, yeah, and you guys do – so the fights that Rogan and Goldberg do not do, are those the ones you call?
Exactly right. And a lot of those are outside of North America.
So how do you work that? Do you guys, like, when you sit down – because fights come up, there's no, like – it's not like, hey, April came around and the schedule is set for the next 12 months. These things seem to pop up pretty quickly. Obviously, I know – just recently, I don't know when we're going to post this, but UFC 200 just became official with the Conor and Nate Diaz rematch, and then Frankie Edgar, Jose Aldo on the undercard or whatever. I don't know if you can call it. They can't call that an undercard, I guess. But so that's official, and that's going to happen at UFC 200. But how do you know which fights you're calling? How far, like, in advance?
So most likely leading into UFC 200, it's not official, but we're going to do live events on Thursday and Friday night. So we'll do a triple header, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, live fights. So I'll call the fights Thursday, I'll call the fights Friday, and then we'll likely work the desk for UFC 200. So, but, you know, it's tricky. I mean, there will be like a 5-week stretch in October and November during football season where I'm working 5 straight UFC shows. You know, I've only missed, I think, 2 FS1 shows, you know, for the birth of my daughter and my sister's wedding. So, like, I missed our first show in Scotland. But for the most part, I mean, you just sort of budget, you know, 49 or 50 of your weekends during the year and you hand those to the UFC, you know.
And when you do, so let's say you're calling a fight, and where was the last fight you just called?
God, man, it's like they all freaking run together. Brisbane, Australia.
Okay,
yeah.
So when do you get to Brisbane if the fight is on Saturday?
So if the fight's Saturday, I might get to Brisbane on Wednesday. Normally, I would arrive 2 days before on a Thursday. So it's more likely a 4-nighter, whereas if you're doing a college football game, it's probably 2 or 3.
And so what college football game did you call this year?
I did. It was 49-3. It was Arizona at Washington. But, to be in that big conference environment, I had done a Rutgers game actually against the Ohio Bobcats of all teams back in 2011, but I hadn't done a college football game for 4 years. So I was actually pretty anxious for it, and being in that environment, obviously in Seattle was pretty special. So glad to have that one, under my belt.
Who was your color analyst?
Petros Papadakis.
Oh, yes, another great personality.
Dude, I mean, that's one colorful guy and really a well-read, smart guy. I mean, even just spending a couple dinners with him, he borderline blew me away. So
that's a couple of good personalities, man, in the box that you don't get too often. Usually there's like one, the color guy may be like the high-energy dude, and the play-by-play is down the middle, professional. And you guys are both, I feel like, super high-energy, like passionate dudes.
Well, thanks, man. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm a football guy. I mean, I never played, but, my grandparents were New England Patriots season ticket holders. And, we went to Patriots games when they were the laughing stock of the NFL. So they'd take us out of Sunday school early. We'd go to the Patriots game at Foxborough Stadium, and they'd lose every week, dude. Like every fucking week they'd lose. So it's nice that they've turned it around. But no, I'm a football guy, and I appreciate you saying that about the energy. Football certainly is right there with mixed martial arts in terms of being my foremost passion. So it was exciting to get to do that with P. And, dude, I mean, he's just insane, man. Like, there's so much personality that comes across on camera. You should see this dude off camera. He's out of his mind.
I can imagine. How do you feel like calling, let's say you're calling, and when you call an MMA event, there's, there might be 10, 12 fights, let's say, compared to a football game. How do the people, I wonder, how is the reaction from people online? Like say the criticism and the praise. Who is tougher on an announcer, the MMA fans or football fans?
Well, I speak from much more experience, obviously, in the UFC space, having probably called about 1,000 fights at this point. So as I think you see a little bit, this MMA sport sort of lives on Twitter and lives on social media. So there is just so much in terms of feedback. I think my focus for the college football game, because I was only doing one, for the first time in 4 years, was, stay in my lane and make sure that I memorized those rosters to such an extent that there wouldn't be this avalanche of criticism for the guy who they plucked out of the octagon, to do the football game. It was a rare circumstance that I was able to get a national game. They took a guy who needed to fill in on the NFL, and I guess I was on the short list of short-term replacements and got the call. But, I've always been an NFL guy. So even though, my great aunt and uncle, Ohio State season ticket holders for like 45 years.
Great people. They must be great people.
Great people. They are. They are. But, I wasn't like locked into college football, living and breathing this stuff, because we're live almost every Saturday night. So I feel like I was much better equipped to go call an NFL game than to just, step out of the UFC arena and go do college football. So I was as anxious as I've ever been in my life for a broadcasting assignment. I literally told my wife, like, I'm not parenting the kids this week. I locked myself in my bedroom, which is my makeshift office, and I just watched as much film and memorized that roster as best I could, to put myself in a position to do all right, I guess.
Yeah, Frank Solich is the coach of the Bobcats, right?
That's right.
My brother played quarterback for OU, so that was 12 years ago now, I guess. So I'm very familiar with the Bobcats. Not their current roster. I have to watch the film like you to get into that one, man. But that, I can imagine that had to be tough. Man, something recently that happened. What happened with old Ariel Helwani? He's gone. Fox booed him?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of layers to the relationship. I won't speak too much on it. It's certainly a big loss for them. I mean, he's the foremost journalist in the space. He's more connected than anybody in the space. So I'm not exactly sure what goes into it. Obviously he has his show, the MMA Hour on MMAfighting.com, and maybe there was a feeling on one side or the other. There was a conflict of interest, but the MMA world is a little bit crazy, man. It really is. And you just never know what's going to happen. Part of the reason I love it, and not to sort of diverge and get away from the question, but there's headlines every day, right? So like we do our podcast on Monday and it's 90 minutes, and our producer would love us to split it into 2 1-hour podcasts, but the story advances in MMA so fast and so quickly on social media that you feel like if you record something on Monday and you don't put it out, it's worthless, 72 hours later.
Yeah, that's the Anik and Florian podcast with Kenny Florian, the former UFC fighter, who's very well spoken. Probably has the best hair on TV. I would say. Maybe.
I kind of like your hair. I don't know. We're on television.
She's got a fresh cut, man. So
it's
good. The sides cut. Yeah, but Kenny's great. Now, do you have any MMA background as far as training?
No, I mean, I took boxing lessons for 2 years in Woburn, Massachusetts back then, but nothing on the ground yet. I live like 10 minutes from American Top Team. They just built a brand new plus 40,000 square foot headquarters here in Coconut Creek, Florida. So I got to get in there. I do own a gi, but I have not trained in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu just yet. What about you?
I wish, man. Same kind of thing. I've done some striking and kicking with a guy here for a couple of years, but nothing on the ground. No real like jiu-jitsu. I've always wanted to get into it, and I've even called places and tried to do it, and I've actually had my daughter in a few times. She's only 5, and she wants to get into it. When she's like 6 and 7, I think we're really going to get her into some classes, and maybe, I don't know, maybe they got any father-daughter classes I can take?
Oh, yeah, and we have fighters, too. Lauren Murphy, one of our fighters, she got into fighting by taking her son to a jiu-jitsu class and getting pulled into one, so there are stories like that. So you're 32 years old, so I figure a few more years in the league, and maybe your UFC debut when you're like 37, get a couple years in, and
You know how stupid I am? When I was, I would say 3 or 4 years ago, I honestly thought I'm like, you know what? I was feeling, maybe I just had one day, I had like one morning when I felt pretty healthy, and I was hitting the pads with my dude, and I'm like, man, this is cool. This will be fun to get out there. Maybe I could think about this when I'm done. And then we did a little like grappling on the ground, and he was just like showed me. We were just literally training. He only weighed 180 pounds. I'm 240, and he was like got me like mounted and was standing on top, like show me. He's like elbows, knees, and he showed me how. I was like, this is like the scariest thing in my life.
Yeah,
we're not even you're not even hitting me. So that was I had like a 30-minute dream of a UFC career. So
well, I mean, our heavyweight division, of course, is wide open. When was the last time you weighed like 205 pounds, though?
205 would have been.
Or even 220, because if you're 220, you can cut to 200.
When I was in high school, I was 220.
Yeah,
coming out of high school, senior year in high school. So like if I know they can't get IVs anymore. So say I'm 240, what weight class would I fight if I walk around comfortably at like 238, 239?
Well, the tricky thing is that the heavyweight division is 206 to 266.
Jeez.
Right. So, but we have 10 divisions, I think, right now. You have to be careful adding divisions because right now, like 205 pounds, right? We got less than 40 light heavyweights on the roster right now. And in the heavyweight division, probably something similar. So when you look at the landscape of the UFC, those are actually our shallowest divisions. Light heavyweight at 205 and then heavyweight. So are you going to now add a cruiserweight division or whatever they'd call it at like 225? I don't know that there are enough guys in that middle ground that would warrant starting a division, but that would be the division for you. You'd give up some size, obviously, to these behemoths, but you'd have speed over them, in theory.
Ooh, in theory, yeah, that's right. In theory, it sounds good. There's a big difference. Yeah, I think I'm just going to stay a fan, man. Those guys I have too much respect. And now it's a different world where these kids are coming up as mixed martial artists. They're not. Yeah. You're not a wrestler that learned how to strike or vice versa. It's like these dudes are starting at 5 years old and they're learning everything.
Yeah, the game has really changed, and I still would say wrestling is the best base for MMA and to have success in MMA, but the game really is changing, and I would say even over the last 12 months or so, we've seen a lot of special strikers like Stephen Wonderboy Thompson and Justin Scoggins, guys not long on wrestling experience do really well. And of course, we've seen somebody like George St. Pierre with no amateur wrestling experience go on to become a great MMA wrestler. But I think for guys like us, you're a little bit younger than me, but without a high school wrestling background, it's very difficult to learn how to grapple and how to wrestle at an advanced age,
Yes, that is definitely an advanced age compared to those young bucks. Who's the little ripped up kid that just tapped out? That was like the little happy dude. I forget his name from Texas.
Sage Northcutt.
Sage Northcutt, man.
Yeah.
Who was that tapped him?
Brian Barberina.
Okay, I watched that, and I know he was like on his projected just to take over the world basically at 19 years old. Just this little fresh faced fun kid that just seemed to love everything. And he got tapped. Has he been? Does he have a new fight coming up?
He'll have one scheduled, I think, probably this summer. I think he bit off a little bit more than he could chew. And, of course, that fight was up a division at 170 pounds. It was a short notice replacement opponent. He wasn't super healthy for the fight. So I give him the benefit of the doubt. There's no doubt in my mind that a guy like that is really that next level 2.0 type fighter. He's born into this, and by 19 years old, comes at this game with more skills than most people have acquired who are right now in their 30s in their fighting prime. So I think that, the ceiling's very high for Sage Northcutt. Dude, we see with so many undefeated fighters, I mean, how much time do we have, right? Guys who suffer their first loss and are so much better for it. And I think sometimes when you don't suffer that first loss early on, you get so used to winning that you don't experience adversity, and it maybe stunts your growth a little bit in that middle portion of your career. So I think Sage is going to be great. I don't know if he'll ever fight for a UFC title, but I think he'll be an elite fighter.
Having that first loss, it makes sense. It was your podcast. You guys had Weidman call in, and I think he was saying how almost losing to Luke Rockhold, there's like some pressure lifted off his shoulder, and like there's not that anxiety there anymore, and he can kind of try different things in training camp.
Yeah, absolutely right. He said exactly that, and he can work on skills and I think Chris Weidman's an interesting case because he's always sort of been like the natural, right? I mean, this guy, obviously he wrestled at Hofstra, but he goes into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competition and, starts tapping out guys that, historically he has no business tapping out. So I think for him, especially, a loss can be of value, especially fighting a guy like Luke Rockhold, because you learn a lot about maybe a guy who might be better than you, like Weidman thought he was better than everybody he fought. There's an argument to be made, and he might be having these thoughts that Luke's better than him, and is a better striker than he is. And he's already, hired Mark Henry in a more significant role to try to shore up some of those weaknesses and make himself a little bit more offensive. So we'll see. I think it's going to help Weidman. I'm not going to say he's going to beat Luke, but I think, the loss will help him going forward.
I watched that fight, and I remember I'm a big fan of both those dudes, and it was almost like, it wasn't like the Holly Holm Ronda fight where Ronda was just dinged from the jump basically early on and was like charging and just couldn't seem to get to her. But it was almost like Luke was just super calm and just stuck with the game plan and just looked really good. And Weidman almost looked like he was pushing and chasing and just couldn't seem to get into his groove. And I know he even said he broke a few bones in his foot and all that, but Rockhold had the staph infection going on the week of. So it's like
exactly right.
There's things going on all over the place that we don't know about until after, and sometimes you never figure them out. But, yeah, I'll be looking forward to the rematch of that. A guy I'm a big fan of is Brendan Schaub. I had him on here, and Brendan was in the heavyweight division, got out of there. I think he talks publicly about getting the axe from UFC tonight, I guess it was, and because he's been critical of like the Reebok deal and stuff. Can you explain to me like what the Reebok deal is with the UFC?
Well, so several years ago, right, AJ Hawk could walk into the octagon. You could put the Packers logo on your shorts. You could put your sponsors. There weren't a lot. I mean, there were rules, but there weren't a lot of regulations as to what you could do from a sponsoring standpoint. So they did this Reebok outfitting deal for a number of reasons, but largely to clean up the overall aesthetic, especially for weigh-ins on TV. And even though these UFC fight kits, they're probably not selling like hotcakes on Reebok.com, but it does have a cleaner look to it. From a commentating standpoint, there are things that are gained by this. But for a guy like Brendan Schaub and others who have a marketability and really were doing well financially with sponsors, this hurt. Basically, your rate with Reebok is based upon your accrued experience under the Zuffa banner, which is either with the UFC or the WEC Strikeforce. So, some of these guys who, are not superstars, but stars, haven't necessarily accrued a lot of UFC experience, so they maybe, lose 25 or 30 G's a fight, and it really hurts their bottom line,
I know it goes off of how many fights you have. Some guys getting like 10 or 15 grand a fight from Reebok when they can claim before Reebok they were making 80 or 100 grand off of sponsors and they had 42 patches on their shorts.
Right.
So I see the UFC's side of it. I wonder how the financials are going because I know they've had to work out some kinks where Reebok's messed up some shirts that came out for fighters. I know they messed up a part of Ireland on one of Conor's shirts, which the whole nation just killed him, went crazy.
Yeah.
So it seems like it's something to make him look more professional, I know, but like hopefully they come out with like the 2.0 version of these the gear though, man. Like just the stuff doesn't look that good.
I know. No, you're right. I mean, there have been some hiccups, and I think internally even people with the UFC would be critical of that. But this sport's so much about individuality, and the reason why people know who AJ Hawk is, it's obviously Pro Bowler and your college accolades, unbelievable. But you bring a dynamic to the table, right? Whether it's the hair or the personality, there's more to the overall package AJ Hawk than the elite football player, And so I think for a lot of these guys, Donald Cowboy Cerrone, you build up this persona that Budweiser wants on your shorts, and now he can't put them on. So I think it was an adjustment for a lot of fighters. Some were more critical than others, but that's the thing about the UFC, man. Just like they try, and granted they cut my paycheck, so take this for what it's worth. But they try to make the fights that fans want to see. And if fans don't like this Reebok deal and fighters don't like it, they're not just going to rest on their laurels and sit pat. These guys are difference makers, and I think that it will affect change. Hopefully, to your point, the 2.0 is a little bit more enticing.
So, do the fighters ever talk about creating a union? I'm sure that's a bad word around UFC headquarters.
Well, and it goes both ways. I think for starters, it's easier said than done. But I also think it goes both ways. This is a sport that started in 1993. And I think we all want to rush it, whether it's rush it into the mainstream or rush it in terms of, salaries and everything else. And, these guys bought a company that was not worth a lot of money, and now they could probably get $5 billion for it, So they're still in the process of shoring up a lot of these things. And I just think sometimes patience, well, I would say patience is probably never the operative word when it comes to MMA fans. And I think it needs to be more often. We'll
see. Yeah, it's down the road. I've heard Brendan actually say he's like, UFC is still wearing leather helmets, man, like the NFL.
Yeah,
that was like his analogy to where they're at in the timeline of the sport. So it's true. Yeah, they took something that was basically dead, the Fertitta brothers, and Dana with the face of it basically, and bam, look at it now. It's every weekend there's almost fights, and you're all over the world, and you're traveling. So it's unreal where they're going. I don't know. I don't think it can get too saturated. I know some people say there's too many fights. I'm like, how can there be too many fights? Just don't watch it.
Well, yeah, right.
What do you mean?
Well, let me ask you this, though, because you got 3 kids, and power to you. Forrest Griffin got to me before I had a 3rd kid and started talking to me about, like, overpopulation. You probably heard me bring it up with Chris Weidman.
I did a little bit, yeah.
So I stopped down there, even though I didn't get a boy. But what were we talking about anyway?
Something about the amount of fights they have.
Oh, yeah. So, let me ask you this, because obviously you're locked in, dude. You know what's going on in this MMA space. We do 41 shows this year. How many Saturday nights are you devoting to the UFC?
That's the great thing about DVR, man.
Yeah.
With me being, I'm on the Eastern time zone, so the main event doesn't go on sometimes till midnight, 11:15, 11:30. So I'm going to see it, but when there's I shouldn't even say good. When there's one fight on the whole card that I want to see, I'm paying $59 and buying the pay-per-view probably.
No doubt about it. Yeah.
And I'm watching you guys on FS1 too, because you're putting out a lot of free shows, and then on Big Fox, whatever you want to call it, where they're free completely.
It's funny because, I heard a lot of that, especially when the FS1 deal was consummated, that, God, you're doing 41 weeks a year. I don't have any family time. But, right, the DVR is certainly there. You don't have to watch the fight. And now I feel like those 11 or 12 weekends a year that we're not live, what am I doing? Right? We're dark March 12th. We're dark this weekend. All of a sudden you have 3 out of 4 weeks where we're dark, and I'm like, dude, what am I doing with my life? Especially when it's not football season. I've always wondered sometimes why we're not darker during football season, because there is so much competition. Why we don't just lay back a little bit in September and October. But obviously people much higher than me and much smarter than me are making those decisions. But yeah, I'm with you, man. I like it. I like it being frequent. I miss it when it's not around. I think if you want to skip the prelims, I got no problem with it. But dude, these main cards, man, I really feel like every main card we do, has something for everyone.
100%, I agree. And it's like a podcast. It's like everybody has a podcast now. What are you going to, I'm like, who cares? Don't watch it. Just sort through the ones you want to hear. Like, that's all it is. It doesn't make sense to me. I understand it's true. You can rack up some cash if there's 2 pay-per-views in a month, or there's if you're trying to buy a pay-per-view every month. Yeah, man, it's not cheap. There's no doubt about that. But you guys are offering it in a lot of different ways, and I want to see fights. And if I don't want to see the fight, guess what? I'm not going to buy it.
Yeah, and you got UFC Fight Pass, obviously. But for me, it's fun. Like the 17 Sundays, regular season, the NFL. You're all going to think I'm a terrible parent, but like I tell my wife, like she knows, like when we lived in Vegas, like 9:55 a.m. on an NFL Sunday, she's leaving with my two girls, because those 3 hours at least, if not the 6, are sacred. And UFC pay-per-views have become the same way for me. I mean, obviously I work a lot of these on the desk, but when I'm not working, dude, I'm having a party. Like my night revolves around UFC pay-per-views the way it revolves around NFL Sundays. And 5 years ago, man, there's nothing that would have touched the NFL, and the UFC's creeping.
You don't really have to buy it, do you? Can they give you a code?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I'll buy it. Like, I bought the McGregor Diaz fight because I had my Fight Pass going on my TV, and it wasn't working, and I just bought the pay-per-view. But I probably buy 2 a year. But my Fight Pass account is a VIP account that, I get them all on my phone, my iPads, and things like that.
Okay, all right. I'm just making sure, man, because that's garbage. That's garbage if they're making you
well, thanks, man.
do that.
No, they take care of me.
Oh, just quickly, I wanted to bring up, not a big deal, but so the Reebok deal happened. You can't have different patches, whatever, on your shorts. How did Conor have that Monster Energy M on his shorts?
So Monster they save one spot on the shorts for like a signature sponsor, and Conor has a deal with Monster. The UFC also has a deal with Monster. So you'll see certain situations like that, and the UFC, I believe, as part of the Reebok deal, reserves the right to place one patch of its choosing on your shorts wherever they so choose.
Okay,
so.
I don't know if I've seen that on other fighters. Have you?
Yeah, I think it's few and far between. I know Donald Cerrone was fine for putting something, I think a patch that dates to his Muay Thai career on his shorts. So, yeah, the instances are rare, but I think I might have seen it once or twice before. Okay,
what do you think about the old Jon Jones situation? Whenever we post this, he'll hopefully be out of jail. I think he's still being held as of tomorrow. He goes to a hearing, I think, in front of the judge for getting cited for 5 tickets for drag racing. I watched the video online of
what'd you think
dash
of that?
cam. I felt like both sides were kind of out of line, the cop and John. John, like, I don't know. I feel for him with him. Like, I don't know if he really wasn't drag racing and he was revving his engine. So for people who don't know, John pulled up to a stoplight, I guess, revved his engine to some fans, and then took off and got pulled over. But he didn't get pulled over for speeding, from what it seems like.
Right.
The guy said you were drag racing, and then they both kind of got an attitude with each other where John kind of started talking back right away, and then as he saw he was getting written up for 5 citations, the cop also, I felt, made some pretty unprofessional remarks back to him.
Yeah, I mean, I do think he is being targeted to some extent there in Albuquerque, New Mexico, but he's asking for it a little bit too, right? I mean, people are always asking why he doesn't have a driver, and I understand he wants some freedom to be able to get in his Corvette and go where he wants to go without a driver. I get it. But when you got an interlock in your car, when you got 5 kids, when you're on probation and you're less than a month away from returning to get the belt you never lost for the first time in a year and a half almost, I just don't know that you need to be taking those risks, and you as a professional athlete and a father, you just have to know. And you're not on probation. You got to be careful revving your engine if you're AJ Hawk. So, I mean, my wife is like all on John's side here, and normally I am too, but as much as I would say he's being targeted, I just think you got to be a little bit smarter with some of your decisions, especially, when you're on probation this close to a world title fight.
Yeah, when you're on probation this close to a world title fight and all that, as hard as it would have been for him, he probably should have just kept his mouth shut and just been boiling inside and just lost his mind on Twitter or something afterwards.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a frustrating situation too, and at least as we sit here Wednesday night, the UFC, I think, is reserving judgment, hoping to let the legal process play out. You can be sure Daniel Cormier wants Jon Jones to make that walk so he can get that payday and get that revenge. And, it's just tough because I'm surprised Jon hasn't become an even bigger superstar than he is. And he's still a top 3 superstar in MMA, but I figured there'd be a few markets in the U.S. like L.A. where he'd fight and just run that town. I mean, trot him out to L.A. twice a year and he'll just bang out the Staples Center. And it hasn't happened to the extent to which I thought. And part of it is obviously some of this legal stuff and how he's making it difficult for the promotion. The other part of it is that I think he just wants to be the greatest fighter of all time, and he doesn't much care about anything else that goes along with it. And to me, that's sort of become a little bit disappointing and tired.
Yeah, he's such a good fighter that it's a shame. He should be. He's still so young. He could be the best fighter ever. But you never know if he can't get out of his own way.
Yeah.
Does the UFC do these guys have like a personal conduct policy in their contracts?
Yeah, all of them do, and this would be a further violation of it. I would think to violate your probation. So, I think there's a sensitivity because of his past issues. I think he'll fight April 23rd, but he's certainly not making it easy on Lorenzo and Dana. And, I know what they deal with internally, and for Joe Silva, our matchmaker, and, when stuff like this comes down the pipe, they just gotta, just be scratching their heads. Like, what else do we need to do to make this fight? And a few weeks out, I don't know. I just wish Jon would be a little bit more considerate and careful at times.
It's a delicate situation, and when you watch those guys on like their whatever sit down with Joe Rogan in the middle of them, and you watch Jon and Daniel, they legit hate each other with a passion.
Dude, that counterpunch shit is crazy. I've done it like 5 times. I did the one with John Jones and Rashad Evans back before they fought at UFC. And dude, they went for 90 minutes. I laid out. I didn't say anything. They went for 90 fucking minutes, dude. Didn't stop, Cameras stopped rolling, didn't stop. There's nothing fabricated about that type of drama and that type of hate. And if you would have told me after doing that one with John and Rashad that Jon would actually have another rival in his career this soon after that he hated more in Daniel Cormier, I'd be like, dude, there's no way. And sure enough, this is hotter than that ever was.
Oh, when Daniel says I'm prepared to die to win that fight or whatever, and Jon just stares at him, he's like, be ready for that or be prepared to die.
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
And I was like, oh, oof.
Well, it's funny about that because I don't know if Daniel Cormier buried a child,
I do not know that actually.
So, because a lot of people were critical of Daniel being like, I'm willing to die in there. And, it was an infant. I think it was a car accident. He wasn't in the car. I don't know the exact details, but he's a good friend of mine. And so when he says, I'm willing to die in there, part of that, in my humble opinion, is because, when, dude, you're a father. When you've buried a kid, what the fuck else matters?
Oh,
right?
For real, I got goosebumps as you were saying that, man. That makes me,
so when that history, so when he says I'm willing to die in there, I think some small part of it is dude, I've been through fucking hell, man.
Yeah.
If you don't think I'm willing to die in there, I am.
It's like The Revenant. You seen Revenant?
No, I'm excited. I'm going to watch it on the flight to Croatia. I'm excited.
Okay, yeah, that's a good one to say for that flight. It's like Leo. They killed his son in front of him, man. Well, spoiler alert. My bad.
No, that's all right. No, I believe
know the story.
I've been spoiled. Yeah, that's all right.
Sure, people know the story. But I always wondered that about. So does that decision come down to Lorenzo and Dana, whether Jon fights or not? Are they the only two guys that really have to make that decision?
Well, I think the judge on Thursday morning, obviously if you're listening to this or watching this, the decision might already be in. But I think, the judge will be the first shoe to drop. And I think, it's up to Lorenzo and Dana's discretion. But I would think that a probation violation would constitute a violation of the conduct policy. So Anthony Rumble Johnson better get ready.
It's so different, though, with the UFC, I feel like, where that fight is dependent on Jon being there. It's not like a whole team where you suspend one player. It's easy for Roger Goodell, I think, to suspend a player that say it's on the line. What should we do? Right. Hey, you got to sit this guy down. That's a little different if you're trying to sit Tom Brady down. He's gonna appeal. Sure. He's gonna appeal and sue the league, and he's gonna win, which is unheard of.
Yeah.
But for these guys, it's one guy that we need in there. They got to be so torn. I feel like what do we do if the judge lets him off and he's good to go? Why would they sit him down?
Well, and, part of the reason why you see our pay-per-view structured with 2 championship fights is because, we want to make sure there's a championship on pay-per-view as much as possible, And so you see we did it certainly with UFC 196 and Demetrius Johnson's fighting on the same fight card. But, dude, promotionally, it just puts them in a really bad spot. And, it seems what's sad for it, it seems like Jon's behaving, right? He's put the trees aside, he's not drinking. He's behaving himself. And he's sober and he's rejuvenated and he was sober with the cop, at least, by my, what I can tell. But again, it's like he's asking for it without asking for it,
There's some, he has some history deep in there. He's got to have some resentment towards somebody in there when you're arguing with a cop like that. And I don't know. People should watch the video. I think it's pretty, it's pretty good. You watch the body cam footage. I'm glad they had it on. And John knew it. John says, "Is that on? You recording me?"
Yeah,
He's
of course. I've been here
is.
before. That's my fucking interlock right there, dude.
You're right. That is true. He looks right at his body camera and says, "You recording this?" That's true. That's a guy that's been around the block a little bit. I like it.
Dude, you're right that people should watch it, and they should watch. If you have 10 minutes to watch the whole thing, I think it's the only way, because when you see it cut up, it paints a different picture. For
sure. And I'm always 99% of the time when I watch any kind of videos, especially with athletes, I'm on the cop side. I always think cops I've always my whole life. I'm like, I don't care what happened. Right, I could be completely wrong, and I'm just going to shut my mouth. That's all that matters. I'll figure it out later. But this one I was a little. I'm like, yeah, man, John. Obviously, if you're on probation, you got to know you have no more strikes to give. So you just got to find a way to take it. And then the cop, like, I don't know, just some weird snarky remarks back to him.
No, the cop really rubbed me the wrong way, but I tend to have always been like you. I mean, I got 3 tickets in 6 days when I was 17. So I have been, driving like a grandmother basically for the last 20 years, but you're right. Like, I just don't try to incite them, at all. I mean, and I feel like John just, I think he expressed some regret, I think, for part of that behavior. But again, dude, it's like, here we are, March 30th, right? Fight week starts April 17th, and he's in a jail cell in Albuquerque, New Mexico right now. Probably doing like 300 push-ups every 10 minutes.
He's just adding fuel to his fire, man. He just needs some motivation. Yes. That's all he's doing. It's all like part of his plan. He's like, this chip in my shoulder just getting bigger and bigger.
Man, I know, and he says he doesn't fight on anger anymore, but I'm trying to get him to walk out to Angry Johnny by Poe, which he walked out to, I believe, back at UFC 94. But it's just crazy, man. Like, dude, I mean, like, living and breathing in this MMA space, and it seems like you're pretty in it as well, and maybe more so during the off season. Like, is this real? This world that I mean, it's nuts, right?
It's not the characters that you guys deal with on a daily basis, and I'm just the fan that watches the UFCs or the pay-per-views a lot, and I watch clips on YouTube of different things going on. Now, for the record, why do people think that wasn't you in the middle of John and Daniel on their little scuffle? Who was that?
No. Our PR guy, Dave Schaller.
Okay, people were trying to say that was you. I'm like, that is not Jon Anik in there, man.
I appreciate you saying that. He's got blonde hair and blue eyes, But I was getting text messages from family members like, dude, you went right through that backdrop. What's up? You start lifting. That was crazy. We constantly get mistaken for each other. I think it's just the beard, the short haircut, and I would imagine
Dana and Joe probably get mistaken for each other too.
Yeah, there's all sorts of stuff going. I get mistaken for Helwani all the time. I mean, I don't know. We're all just in this MMA world getting mistaken for each other, I guess.
That's all right, man. I appreciate your time, man. I'm gonna let you roll. I know you're busy, man. You have a family, a lot of gigs you do for the UFC. What's next for you as far as UFC?
So it's Croatia, April 10th. Dude, have you seen this Big Ben Rothwell, man? It's out of his mind.
He's a scary human.
Yeah, he's fighting Junior Dos Santos in the main event. So another big one for Ben Rothwell in Croatia. And then the next one after that will be Rotterdam, the Netherlands. And that's another heavyweight main event, Alistair Overeem and Andrei Arlovsky. So it's
big fights going over there, too.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, too, I'll say about the FS1 shows that I do. I mean, certainly they're a little bit more lean when you look at some of the prelims, but every main event on FS1, right, 25 Saturday nights, every main event we do on FS1 is a killer fight that could probably be the co-main event on most pay-per-views, So I really do think the main cards on FS1 have been outstanding. I mean, like, you didn't go to that show in Cincinnati, that May show with Matt Brown and Eric Silva, did you?
I did not.
Because that was probably the best main event I've ever called.
I was not able to go to it, but I know what you're talking about. There's some monsters. I've only been to one live event out in Vegas years ago. It was Chael Anderson. Was that did Chael fight Anderson twice?
Yeah. So you probably went to UFC 148, like a summer show, maybe?
Yeah, it was in July.
Yeah, yeah. There you go.
And Tito fought on the undercard. I remember Tito came out right where we work. I through company called Clinch Gear. I got to know Dan Henderson years
Sure.
ago. So
Yeah.
Dan's the man. I know Dan's fighting heavyweight, and he has to gain weight. He has to like gain a pound to get over 206 or whatever.
Dude, I saw Roots of Fight sent you some of Hendo's gear. I mean,
Yes.
how about that, dude? You know, it's just,
Oh.
I mean, we could go on for hours, but it's amazing what he's been able to do. And that's been sort of one of the more special parts of the job for me is, you know, a guy like Hendo, who I put on such a pedestal, to be able to go to Brazil and call his rematch with Shogun. You know, it's like, you know, sort of pinch me moments.
That was considered one of the greatest fights of the year for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was an absolute monster.
We gotta get you back to a show live. Did you meet Dana that night by chance?
I did not. No.
Yeah,
Dana's a big Boston dude, so you guys can get together and talk about the Patriots, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. But I'm surprised Bill Belichick never went after you. You know, I mean, I know obviously he wasn't. You know that you drafted, I think 6 overall. Was that right?
5. Yeah.
Okay, 5. Jeez, fucking do your homework.
Doesn't matter.
But obviously, you know, he wasn't going to be able to get you in the draft. But I always thought you'd be a guy that had some interest.
Who knows? And I love Bill Belichick. I love those dudes. They're doing the right thing. Keep Tom Brady around, you're going to win. I was in Green Bay for 9 years. You got Aaron Rodgers. You always have a chance to win it all.
Yeah,
that's how it works, man. Those great quarterbacks. All right, man. Appreciate it. Thanks a lot. We will. What's your Twitter name? We're gonna link it and everything. But
it's JON_ANIK. So Jon Anik, little underscore in the middle there.
All right, we'll be watching you, Jon Anik and Brian Stan, calling these fights, and hopefully you do some more football games. I'd love to see it, man. You and Petros get some high energy boxes in there. So yeah, man, we're excited to watch the future for you. But thanks a lot for coming on.
My pleasure, man. Hope to have you on our show soon.
All right, thanks, man.
Thanks, AJ.
Bye.
We're glad you could join us for today's conversation. After you subscribe to the show, head over to thehawkcast.com or reach out to AJ directly on Twitter at @officialAJHawk to recommend future guests that will help us inspire people to keep talking. Thanks again, and we look forward to speaking with you next time on the HawkCast.